Hey folks, this is Samuel Heber from SamuelHeber.net. Samuel Heber on YouTube, Samuel Heber on Facebook, Heber Family Adventures on Instagram. I'm here with yet another rendition of Heroes of Autism. I'm here to talk with Lauren Melissa about her experiences about being autistic, and she is actually very active in our community, but all the way in Charlie Old England. Lauren, can you tell the folks a bit about yourself and about your life?
Well, sure. Yes, I'm Lauren Melissa, and I'm actually all the way in New York City. And I am a librarian. I was diagnosed with autism later in my life at age 23. And
Mhm.
I have spent the last several years of my life just getting to understand and unpack who I am, who I was through this autistic lens. And it's been a wonderful journey for me. Of course, there's been ups and downs. I also live with my cat, and I'm really excited to be here and to be able to talk about autism with you.
Thank you. And I apologize for getting your locations wrong. The person who sent me your Instagram was from England, so I made the assumption, oh, Lauren must also be English.
Oh, that happens a lot. I'm not surprised because there are so many autistic advocates in the UK. So a lot of people are surprised when they find out that I'm American.
But that's okay. Americans are cool too. I mean, we don't have the charming accents, but uh, anywho, all right, let's get to it. My second question is, how can you tell me a bit about your blog called Alti Tips? It's not called Alti Tips. I think that's how, if I'm pronouncing it right.
So I run an Instagram that is very similar to a blog because my photo captions are so long these days. They're basically blog posts. And I share in each of my Instagram posts an Audie tip. And the Instagram itself is called Ask BNL. And what the Audie tips are they are basically responses to people's requests for advice. And the people requesting are actually autistic. So what it started as was me simply on my own sharing coping skills that I had managed to build up throughout my life. And actually, when I was diagnosed with autism later, when I was diagnosed at age 23, my psychiatrist said to me that she was amazed by the number of coping skills that I had managed to build up on my own without a diagnosis. This left me feeling a little resentful, actually, that I had been missed from being diagnosed because of the coping skills that I had managed to build up. Because it's not as though I didn't struggle even with these coping skills.
Mm-hmm.
After about a year, though, I started to feel like my coping skills were something that I could share and maybe help support other autistic people through sharing these skills. So that was the original intention behind the Audie Tips. However, as it went on and went on and went on, I think I'm up to almost 800 Audie Tips at this point. I started to get those requests, and the Instagram transformed from being just me talking about, oh, this is what I like to eat and how I like to eat. This is how I exercise to build muscle strength. This is how I deal with sensory overstimulation. It went from there to being more of an advice column where people send in their requests and I reply.
Wow, that's really impressive. And I think, one of the huge things that I am discovering time and again doing these interviews is that women on the autism spectrum are being diagnosed much later in life, where the boys are being diagnosed at 2, 3, my case 14, but much earlier. And it seems that like girls are often like missed because you guys have this ability to develop these coping skills on your own and have such an understanding of language and communication. But what are some of these coping skills that you, for my viewers who don't know who you are, can you give us like two or three coping skills that you think are pretty vital to your success?
I would say that as a young person, some of the coping skills that I developed that really helped were building routines. I had a lot of independence in my household. My mom was very busy and she worked a full time job and she was a single mom. So I was able to build my day exactly how I wanted it. And building those routines, waking up at the same time, having the same thing for breakfast, walking to school the same way, walking home the same way, coming home, taking a nap, doing homework. I did the same things every day, which is something that is very helpful for autistic individuals and something that I just built in on my own. Other coping skills that I think are essential have to do around executive functioning. I struggle with task initiation, especially. So I built rhythms into my life to motivate myself to start doing tasks like homework or, as I grew older, professional work by incorporating my special interests, playing music that was related to my special interests as a way to motivate myself, or even rewarding myself by saying, okay, if you work on this task for an hour, you can engage in your special interest for 30 minutes. And I think that was another coping skill that helped me to succeed academically. But
Hmm.
like you said, those coping skills that I developed also prevented me from getting a diagnosis. And many of these young women who are unable to receive an early diagnosis also develop unhealthy coping skills. I was one of them. I had many unhealthy coping skills that I had to undo after my diagnosis. And it
Hmm.
really can put a strain on mental health. And many autistic women have co-occurring mental health disorders as a result of having to mask and cope through these things on our own.
If you don't mind sharing, what are some of these unhealthy coping skills so that uh, therapists and other professionals can actually see, like, hey, wait, this girl may be autistic. We need to help her. Like, what are some of these uh, coping skills that weren't so healthy?
There's a large range of them. I think for myself, because I was not really permitted to STEM, and I was teased in middle school for STEMming, which is self stimulatory behaviors, for those who maybe are unfamiliar with that term. It often manifests maybe as rocking back and forth, or tapping, or flapping. For me, I like to jump up and down and clap a lot. When I learned very early that if I did those things, I would be teased by my peers, I chose to stuff those stems down. And then when I would go home, I would stem in ways that were harmful. So they're referred to as self-harming stems. I would often, like, I guess one specific example of that is that I would slice my gums with my nails over and over and over again. It
Mm-hmm.
was very painful and very bad for my teeth too, I'm sure.
Hmm.
Other unhealthy coping skills would be revisiting social mistakes that I made, trying to figure out what I had done wrong. Since I was doing that on my own, it turned into a lot of anxiety and a lot of negative self-talk.
Thank you so much for sharing that very vulnerable answer. I definitely also had that issue of revisiting social situation. What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? And I'm sure for you, it got to the point where any social interaction, you it's just automatically assumed I did it wrong. Uh,
Definitely.
and and that's the thing I try to help my younger clients understand is that you're not necessarily wrong in what you did, but like this is a learning opportunity, and there are often things that you're doing right that other people that you interact with, even if they're neurotypical, they can be wrong. That you can be right in certain situations. How were you able to start recognizing, I actually did really well in that social situation?
I think that I just try to no longer assess how I did in a social situation. Did I do it right? Did I do it wrong? I tried to just live in the present moment and be mindful of whether or not I am enjoying my time. And if I enjoyed my time and it seemed as though everyone else enjoyed their time, then I let it go and I move on to the next moment of my life.
Lauren, that is absolutely beautiful, and you're able to let it go and just viewing it on you how you feel rather than analyzing the facts and getting caught up in the details, which is something that a lot of autistic people struggle with, the details. And it's really beautiful that you're able to see the big picture. of your interactions. Um, and then, but I think one of the other big interactions that I get asked a lot because I'm married is dating. Um, how has dating been for you as a young woman on the spectrum? Let's first go with what happened. How was dating before you knew you were autistic, and then how was dating after you knew you were autistic?
Prior to being diagnosed with autism, dating was very stressful. I think that's mostly because everyone, when they go on a first few dates, they want to leave a good impression.
Hmm.
But for autistic people, whether or not we're diagnosed, we, especially autistic women, we've learned to mask ourselves and we try to be exactly what the other person wants us to be.
Hmm.
So when I would go on first dates, second dates, third dates, my primary focus was to seem as non broken as possible and to mask myself into what I thought the other person would want to see. This led to me being in relationships with people who, and it's not their fault, but they were dating someone that was constantly trying to be someone that they weren't in an effort to please them. And by the time I would burn out and confess that I had been putting so much pressure on myself to be this perfect person, by the time I would confess that, usually I was already building up resentment towards the other person and I would just want to leave the relationship.
Hmm.
So dating was very hard. I didn't have a relationship that went beyond a year for that reason and many others.
Hmm.
I think it's also hard for autistic people to find someone to date that they feel safe enough with to be themselves. Because neurotypical people, whether or not they realize it, do put on an expectation that everyone behaves, moves, speaks in a certain way. And if we don't behave in that way, there are consequences. I learned that very clearly through many bullying experiences in middle school, high school, and college. So, regardless of whether or not a neurotypical person intentionally asks me to mask, there is an unspoken rule in many dating situations that I should. So, prior to being diagnosed, that was a major theme in my dating experience. I was actually diagnosed once I had developed a queer platonic partnership with someone.
Hmm.
So I was technically in a platonic relationship because there's commitment involved to the platonic aspect of this relationship.
Hmm.
And I've been in that relationship since then as well. So I've been in that for 7 years.
Hmm.
And my partner was with me along the journey of me discovering that I was autistic and that I am autistic. So I would say in my current dating life, I focus more on friendships and building emotional connection outside of romance and those other aspects that tend to have so many more social rules.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And that is definitely something that I've discussed in other interviews and I've experienced myself is that the whole masking thing, even in my relationship with my wife, I masked for so long what I thought a man should be in a relationship rather than who I actually was. And for the folks out there that are still masking and still struggling, like if that partner is meant for you, coming forth with your autism is very important because that's that's how it's not who you are, but it's how you it's a part of you. And if you're gonna have that special connection, you have to share all of you. And it can and I get it, it can be scary because you don't there's a lot of stigma still around autism. And a lot of us, like Lauren and like myself, suffered a lot of bullying that it makes it very hard to pull down that mask and be like, "This is Lauren, this is
Hmm.
Sam." It can be very hard, but I can attest that my relationship got so much better when I pulled down that mask. And even if you pull down your mask and that ends the relationship, at least you know that you were honest and okay, that person wasn't right for me. And but there are
Hmm.
other fish in the sea, and it's until you pull down that mask and that person's like, ah, I see you and I love you just the way you are. Like my wife is also from New York City. She's like, you would have fit right in with all the other quirky people there. I wouldn't, you know, wouldn't I don't care that you're autistic or not. And like that, you just need that one yes. You don't need like 20 boys hounding down your door. You need one boy if you're a girl, or whatever you identify as, or a girl, one girl. You know, you know, and like you said, like earlier, going through a social situation, did that my partner enjoy themselves? Did I enjoy myself?
Mhm.
It really opens that dialogue once you pull down your mask. And I think that's how you avoid building resentment towards your partner. Because you know, like, why don't you fit my needs? Is needs. Well, the other person can't guess your needs if you never tell them your needs
Mhm.
and how you best communicate. And how we best communicate is the autistic language. That's how I explain to my wife. It's like a language, not a disability. Yeah.
Mhm. It's a great way of putting it.
Okay. But for a lot of autistic people out there, like dating is really hard, and they often ask me, where do I even start? What would be your advice for young ladies on the spectrum? Like where do you start? Do you start on dating profiles? Like where do you start?
I think that depends so much on a person's their personal like life, how things look for them. If they have a social sphere, then I always recommend beginning romantic relationships out of friendship, because that gives you that opportunity to feel comfortable and to show who you are first before jumping into I'm dating and here's this wonderful first impression that I'm trying to give. However, not everyone has a wide circle of friends or has friends that could even be a possibility with. So I certainly understand the draw of online dating. It's my personal recommendation to put, if you're comfortable, your autism diagnosis on your dating profile, because no one wants to waste their time with online dating. There's already so much ghosting that goes on online dating.
Hmm.
So just taking that out of the equation right away, that someone could stop talking to you once you tell them that you're autistic.
Hmm.
I would say, even if you're uncomfortable with putting it in the profile, finding a way to talk about it within the first 3 days would be very helpful. And lastly, I always think it's wonderful to find a partner through your special interests.
Hmm.
So, for example, I love Japanese heavy metal rock music, and there's my cat, but I love Japanese heavy metal rock music. And I've made a lot of great friends by going to concerts and met a lot of great people. Or perhaps someone's very into some kind of fandom. So conventions are a great way to meet people through special interests and build friendships and potentially a relationship out of that.
That's great advice, and it's always definitely the place to start, and what therapists around the world recommend to people like us, that start with special interests. But the thing is, a lot of autistic people don't know how to go beyond just your interests, like how to really get to know that other person, like ask the deep questions. For example, when I started dating my wife, I like fell head over heels in love with her because I thought I had asked all the right questions, like favorite color, favorite music, you know, favorite whatever, and we matched up perfectly. And like, so I thought, oh, we're a perfect match. But she's like, you never asked me what it was like growing up in New York City, or why I am the way I am. That like they're her own personality traits. I spent a lot of time talking about what makes up Sam, but I never learned to dive into who she was. How have you learned to
I,
dive?
I always recommend to people, there are certain apps, not apps, but there are certain questions. If you just Google like 100 questions to ask someone on a date, that dive into a lot of those more intense, meaningful conversations. I think having those guided questions, and even
We cut out there. Okay. So sorry about
Just
the
by Google.
buffering, folks, but here's Lauren talking about the 100 questions to ask someone on a date.
Yeah, so if you just Google 100 questions to ask on a date, there are these wonderful lists, and I've been very transparent in this before and been like, let's play a question game. Like, let me see, I'll Google it and just pull it up and be like, I'll ask one of them, you ask one of them, let's go back and forth. And I've never had someone not enjoy this because it's a wonderful way to talk about yourself and to learn about the other person. And it's structured and helpful for autistic people who maybe struggle to come up with these questions on the drop of a hat, like myself. So I would say using those questions to dive deeper into relationships and not just having it be the special interest or the superficial.
Mhm. That's great, and I'd also recommend. And another thing, folks, if anyone's interested, is a book called "The Five Love Languages," which teaches you how you express love, and then how your partner uh, not only expresses love but wants to receive love. And it's a great way to also start the conversation of getting to know that person. Like for me, I like words of affirmation, but I express love by acts of service, which is, I do a lot of things for my partner, and that's my way of saying, "Honey, I love you." Um, and there are so many great resources out there to like plan out your date. Um, and I think the other huge aspect out there about dating is, again, like when to disclose your autism, and also the big question is how. Like if you if if you want to pretend for a second that we're on a date and you're like, all right, I'm going to disclose to Sam I have autism. How, for our visual thinkers out there, how would you express that to me if we were on a date?
So I definitely wouldn't be like, I have something I need to tell you. I think that's a little too intense.
Right.
What I usually do is I find a moment during the date where I experienced or felt something that I knew was difficult for me because of being autistic. So an example of this could be maybe selecting something off of a restaurant menu,
Hmm.
and I've never been to the restaurant before. So I would be looking at the menu and be like, oh, this is so hard for me. I haven't told you this yet, but I'm actually on the spectrum, and making choices like this on the drop of a hat, or like I'm on the autism spectrum. So making choices like this for me, like on the drop of a hat, is it's a little difficult. So just bear with me, okay? And finding a casual way to include it in something that I'm currently going through, that usually gives the person a chance to be like, oh, no, 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 it's no problem. And then they'll be processing, processing, processing. Some people think I'm making a joke. So I can tell if they thought I was making a joke pretty easily by the fact that they'll be like, ha ha ha, a laugh or something. So then I know, okay, I'm going to bring it up one more time during this date. I'm going to find another one of those moments where maybe the music is so loud. All of a sudden, oh, yeah, like I said, being on the spectrum, this loud music is really distracting. So finding a casual way to bring it up with something that I'm going through at the moment. And usually that leads to them asking me more questions. Oh, you're really autistic? Oh, yeah, I am.
Hmm.
And moving forward from there.
That's really great advice. What would you respond to? Does that mean that you're mentally challenged or retarded, or do you? I read that you guys really hurt yourselves. Do you do that? Like, how would you explain to your date like the stigma or the stereotypes? Like, um, how would you go about explaining like stuff they've read on the internet about autism?
I would generally say that there are so many different kinds of people who are autistic that it's very hard to stereotype autistic people because we're so unique and diverse. And that um, autism is not a learning disability. And I would very much shy away from talking about self harm on like a first date or a second date. So if somebody asked me if that was the case on a first date, that would honestly be maybe a red flag for me, to know that this might not be somebody that I want to go on another date with. So at that point, their reaction to me telling them I'm autistic, whether or not they realize it, is a test. to see if they're compatible with me. So if they give me a really awful response, they're probably going to be knocked down on my list of potential future partners just because I don't want to deal with that.
Right, and that's fair. And for our other autistic folks out there, like that's okay because not that you should hide self harm from you, but the key is like find that appropriate moment to disclose that. And but like, look, I have these great coping strategies, so when I feel the urge to, I do this instead.
Mhm.
For you, it could be put on Japanese heavy metal instead of picking at your teeth, or for
Yeah.
me, it's playing my guitar or going for a walk. Um, and the biggest advice I like to give my clients is if your autism doesn't bother you, it shouldn't bother the other person. But if it really bothers you and like you freak out every time you talk about it, like they're gonna think, oh, there is something to freak out about. Um, and I love the way you just like casually brought it up. Oh, like this food I have trouble with, or the music's too loud. Yeah, it doesn't have to be like this full on like interrogation, like holding the light up to yourself, like it can be incredibly casual, the way you talk about it. Um,
And those deeper conversations about what it is and what it looks like in those more intricate ways will come later.
mhm.
But it's still a date. So try to have fun.
Right, have fun. Like those deep conversations could be, you know, you casually bring it up time and time throughout the dates, or when you're just hanging out at one of your apartments, or as you said, find ways to point it out as you go through a date, like loud noise, and like just casually like bringing it up, like. And the important thing is to know yourself and know how you don't have to be an expert on autism, but just how it affects you personally
Mhm.
is the key that I have found. Um, if you don't mind me asking, what do you do for a living?
I am a librarian, a school librarian.
So is this like your ideal job? And if so, like how'd you go about getting the job? Because for many autistic people, getting a job is incredibly difficult because the interview process can be very overwhelming and
Mhm.
cause a lot of anxiety. And often we're not aware of how like our body language is portraying our anxious behavior. What has worked for you when you've gone for a job?
Well, I think first off, it was highly beneficial for me to have done many practice interviews.
Hmm.
When I was in college, when I was getting my undergrad degree,
Hmm.
I had a career and planning department at the college, and I was able to do practice interviews and receive practice interview questions from them early on in my life. And I think that that very much benefited and helped me. So practicing, practice makes perfect, right?
Exactly.
And I didn't just practice by myself. I would practice with one of the representatives in the department in the career and planning office. So I got to experience that anxiety before actually going into the interview world.
Hmm.
I think that when I go into an interview, I do put on the mask. And this is a place where I guess masking can be beneficial. I do want to make an amazing impression and have the person love me and think that I'm perfect. And so that's okay to work on that within the job interview experience. I also ground myself in my skills and my strengths. I
Hmm.
spend an inordinate amount of time constructing my resumes. It's a wonderful thing that I can work on without having to see someone face to face. And then I read through and I internalize my resume. And I always try to have one or two responses in mind for common interview questions.
That's excellent. And I think yeah, creating that first initial impression is so important, and learning your resume back to front is important. Show the work, and like that's who you're showing in these interviews. A lot of autistic people get caught up. Oh, I have to show them who I am. Like, let them after they hire you get to know you.
Mhm,
How after you've gotten hired, how do you disclose that you're on the spectrum and like this is what I need in this job to succeed?
mhm. Is there any way that you can pause the video?
Sure. Sorry, folks, for that delay. Lauren had to go feed her cat real quick. She wasn't upset by my question. Um, so we all gotta feed our cats. The question was, how do you disclose to your boss that you are on the spectrum, and these are the things that you need in order to do your job well?
Yeah, so I've been in a situation twice where I disclosed to my employer that three times actually, that I am on the spectrum. And the way that I disclosed that I find most memorable is I waited until there was an opportunity for me to present being autistic as a strength.
Mm,
So I would be in a workplace situation where someone would say something along the lines of, "You're so detail oriented, this is so helpful," or something along those lines. And I'd say, "Well, actually, that's because I'm autistic, and it really is helpful in moments like this." And
hmm
so I would disclose in those ways after my employers had already gotten to know me. I think that it can be beneficial for people who need a lot of workplace accommodations, especially around lighting and environment, to disclose, you know, in the application. And I think that is completely appropriate. For myself, I have not done that. Instead of doing that, I usually tour the facility that I am applying to work for. And if I see that its environment is not conducive to my autism, I will not seek employment from that place.
Well, that's a really good idea, and that's I think a really good tip for all you out there. You don't have to take a job just because you think you have to, but it's just not a good fit. It's okay to look for another job. Just look at it as an opportunity. Oh, I got to practice my interview skills. I did great, but it's just not for me. It's
Mhm.
so important knowing uh, as an autistic adult going through the jobs in your career, what works for you and what doesn't. I think that's a really excellent tip. Um, but then the question becomes, how do I find the right job? Like, how did you know? Oh, I want to be a librarian.
I've always really liked the idea of being a librarian. I only recently transitioned into being a librarian. Prior to that, I was an educator for many, many years.
Mhm.
And I slowly began to realize that there's no way I could remain a teacher simply because of the social overload of working with students, parents, families, colleagues. I loved what I was doing, but I didn't think it was sustainable in terms of 10, 20, 30 years from when it was that I decided to transition out of that career. And as a child, I'd spent so much time in librarians as a teen, as an adult, in librarians and libraries. And I had always wanted to be a librarian, but was often told that I couldn't accomplish it because it's a competitive field. And it is a competitive field. There are less and less library jobs available in these
Mhm.
days. So I had concerns about going to get a master's in library and information science, which is what is required to be an official librarian, because I was concerned that I would spend a lot of money on something that I wouldn't actually be able to find a job in. However, I read a book by Toni Marshall called I Am Aspian Woman. And in this book, the lives of many, many autistic women are told through vignettes and anecdotes. And so many of them were working in careers that they were so passionate about that it made them truly happy. And it was very convicting for me. I wanted to be that autistic woman, I guess. And
Mhm.
so I decided to pursue library and information science and to take that risk because I was tired of saying to myself every year, "Oh, I could be halfway through getting my master's in library science if I had started last year." Yeah, I was tired of saying that to myself to myself every year. So finally I decided, you know what? I'm gonna do it. And now 2 years from now I can say I did it instead of living a life of regret. And in that book there were also autistic women who were librarians. And I was so inspired to just want to pursue that dream. So that's why I went forward with it and made the career change.
And that's really wonderful, Lauren. And I'm so glad you were able to pursue it. And what was that book again that you found?
It's called I Am Aspian Woman by Toni Marshall.
All right. for my autistic women out there that watch this, please check out that book. It sounds amazing, and I think there's no better person to learn from than autistic women because they know what that experience actually is. I personally don't know because I've never been a woman and I don't know. So I'm definitely learning a lot from you and my other women, especially that I've interviewed. And I think it's so important to go for what you want. And then I think the key to going for what you want is know what you're passionate about. For you, it's being a librarian. For me, it's um, music and uh, public speaking and connecting with people. And I, definitely hope to, that you find your way into a book like that, like a chicken soup for the soul kind of situation. I think your story would definitely be a good one for that. So, what are the things about being a librarian that you really love? Like, why is this like your be all? Like, you're like, yes, this is what I love.
I like being a librarian because it's a job that is helpful. I always like being helpful, and I like that people come to me needing expertise. They come to me asking for me to help them in the things that I'm already good at, which
Hmm.
is like an autism dream, right? Oh, you need help in the thing that I know? Here you go. So that's been very wonderful for me. I also think that a lot of libraries have very peaceful environments that are good for those who struggle with sensory overstimulation, like myself.
Hmm.
And I, of course, love books and I love reading. There are a lot of behind the scenes tasks that are involved in librarianship that have to do with rote work. For example, as a librarian, I also have to catalog books and write in their mark codes and create online databases for the students. And sitting down and plugging out hours of this work is something that I'm very good at. And I know that's because I'm autistic, and not every autistic person may feel that way. But for me, I know that hyper focusing on a task where I'm just typing and doing the same repetitive thing over and over and over again, if I'm interested in it, I'm going to be pretty good at that. So I enjoy that part of my work too.
And that's perfect. And like that's something I like in my work in early intervention, that entering data and paperwork. I love paperwork because it's like you said, road, like the same repetitive thing is very powerful. And for those who are wondering why is that so fun for us, is because we love patterns, and
Hmm.
completing a pattern is very soothing for an autistic person. Uh, and it's not soothing when we can't complete that pattern or the pattern gets disrupted.
Hmm.
And that's why I always advise like my wife, like let me finish the pattern that I'm working on, whatever it might be, like complete this, and then I'll talk to you.
Hmm.
'Cause if she disrupts that, then it throws me off. And this leads me back to what we talked about in the beginning of this interview. Like you talked about coping skills, healthy ones, unhealthy ones. And one thing that a lot of young people on the spectrum struggle with is this being a form of self care. Like I'm really good at my job. Why should having my hair done the right way, wearing professional clothing, or clothes that may not necessarily be comfortable, be important? And like, and how have you found like it important for you to like do your hair and like present yourself in the best way possible? Like, why is that so important for you?
Well, it is a fact of life that hygiene is important.
Yeah.
And one way I think about it is, while I might personally struggle with task initiation and sensory processing around hygiene, for
Mhm.
example, showers are very hard for me, and so are baths. Baths are even worse. So it's hard to motivate myself to do those things. But what I remind myself is that I'm also very sensitive to smell. And if other people didn't do those things, it would be very hard for me to exist in the world. So it's just kind of me playing my part. But also, I do very strongly believe for myself that in the look good, feel good mentality,
Mhm.
when I'm at work, if I look the part, I feel the part. and
Mhm.
it's a good routine to get in, and it's a boost to my self-confidence. So I would say that those are major reasons why I do partake in hygiene, professional hygiene. I
Mm.
think it's also important to make a routine and make a wardrobe that fits my personal needs. So
Mhm.
just because I need to look good at work doesn't mean I have to wear my hair in the tightest bun possible that will give me a headache and wear scratchy fabrics. I can find clothes and hairstyles and makeup and all these different things that suit my needs.
Mm. And that's the important thing, that there are fabrics and there are even companies out there. I can't remember off the top of my head that make clothes that aren't scratchy for autistic people that have that sensory sensitivity. And I also love how you said like it gives you confidence to look the part, as a librarian in your case, and there are, if you know, there are deodorants out there that bother you. Keep trying new deodorants. Don't just like, I'm gonna just smell the day, and the people have to accept that.
Mhm.
There's so many alternatives out there for people that have those sensitivities. Um, and then I think the other important aspect of self care is also your mental self care. So, what are some tips you have for aspects out there that like autistic people, however you want to refer to yourself as, whoever listening? How do you take care of yourself mentally throughout the day, and so you can still be like doing a good job, but not be like dying inside because of a tag in your shirt or something someone said like at 9:30 in the morning.
I think that there are two aspects of self care that I have to follow for myself, and that is preventative and then reactive self care.
Mhm.
So, in terms of preventative self care, I take a lot of supplements. I always make sure, to the best of my ability, that I do not have a vitamin deficiency because that's going to impact my ability to cope so much. So I take vitamins. I also take collagen because I have hypermobility syndrome, which gives me, it's a common comorbid diagnosis with autism, and it gives me a lot of physical pain. And if I'm in physical pain, it's going to be very hard for me to cope. So that's one preventative measure I take. Another preventative measure I take is I get the same amount of sleep every night. So it's more than just I get enough sleep, it's I get the same amount. So
Mm.
my body is used to that amount of sleep. Obviously, I wouldn't want that same amount to be 4 hours because that's not
Right.
enough, but I always go for 8 hours of sleep, 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night. I also exercise every day. Not everybody needs to exercise every day, but for me, I have to do it every day. Otherwise, I'll stop doing it because I need it to be a routine. So if I try to do it every other day, it will be torture for me on the days that I have to exercise because it won't feel like it's part of my daily routine. So I exercise for around 40 minutes a day, and that helps to keep my body healthy and also my brain healthy. And
Mhm.
it's low impact as exercise. It's not like I'm running a marathon every day. So those are major preventative measures that I take, and then I think reactive measures that I take in terms of coping and self-care are to make sure that I'm eating around the clock, like a snack when I need to. If I get hungry, which is easy to get hungry and to ignore food when you're hyper focused, but then when I get interrupted by humans,
Mm.
that hyperfocus is broken and that low blood sugar, that need for food is going to really harm me. So if I notice that I am getting anxious talking to people at work, then I'll often think, okay, you need to have a snack first. Make sure you've had a snack.
Mhm.
And I also try to practice that letting go of things. Or sometimes I just say, I'm going to put it in a drawer and I'll open it back up when I get home.
Mhm.
And by that, I mean, if somebody said something to me at work that I don't understand, or if I maybe made a social mistake, I try as hard as I can to compartmentalize it and distract myself with my work or with a special interest. And
Mm.
then when I get home, if I still don't understand it, I'll ask my partner about it and get her perspective. Because I really think that helps me when I get another neurotypical person telling me what was going on with that neurotypical person in that moment. Maybe I'm overthinking it, you know? So
Right.
that's always been very helpful.
Lauren, that was very insightful, and I applaud you definitely for so much self-awareness and what you need and don't need. And I think that's really the key to the success of the job. It's not always masking yourself, but it's more about giving yourself what you need to not always, both to prevent and to react. What I like to do is I have what I call my sensory bag that has everything I need to. Like I take my vitamins too, to help me be ready, and also snacks or anything I need. So when I do feel anxious, I am able to soothe myself in a constructive way rather than self-destructive.
I think that's great that you can. Do you have like sensory fidget toys and things like that in your sensory bag?
Yeah, I have like my main thing is I use smells, essential
Mm.
oils, because my whole house always smells like essential oils. So like it makes me think of home where I feel most comfortable. So if I feel anxious, I'll be like, "Oh, it smells like my wife's cooking," or
I've heard that it can be helpful, and something I want to incorporate too. If you put like essential oils on your nose,
mm,
that can be really helpful in those moments. And I'm like, oh, I need to start that.
yeah. And for the folks out there, why do essential oils work? It's because our sense of smell is the biggest trigger for memory. So if you
Mhm.
say certain smells with things that bring you joy, like I don't know what Japanese heavy metal smells like, but if you can
Right.
find like if you can find oil that smells like that or reminds you of it,
Hmm.
it could be a way to help soothe you. Like that song. Okay, let's do it. Yeah, let me get back to work. And then it's just also that your hypersensitivity to sensory stuff can be used to help you. It's not just that ruined my day. No, you can flip it around and make it a positive.
I know for me, I have oral stems. It's so weird to say that out loud. Not oral in your mouth, in your ears, but oral like mouth. So some people like they use chew toys, but those actually hurt my mouth. They hurt my teeth.
Mhm,
So I tend to chew gum a lot when I'm feeling
mhm,
stressed, or I'll drink hot water
mhm.
because it gives a like calming, soothing sensation.
That's great, and I think I've been inspired to hope that autistic women and men take stuff from this interview that like and start following Lauren on learning these tips that how to use your autism for good rather than this prevents me from doing X, Y, and Z because it allows us to do so much in so many unique ways. And Lauren, thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey as being a woman on the spectrum. I always like to end my interview when I interview someone who's also on the spectrum is if you could change the way the world sees autism in one way, what would it be and why?
I think I would change the way that people view autism as a single experience
Hmm.
and the single stereotypical experience. And the reason for that is because I don't think that there will be autism acceptance until people can see the multiplicity of ways that autistic people bring value and worth and perspective into our current society.
Hmm. I think that's perfect because like one thing I always like to quote, and if you watch my interviews, I always like to quote how like Einstein, Tesla, John Lennon, Tim Burton, Temple Grandin, all these amazing people on the spectrum, Steve Jobs, really shaped our society that we have contributed so much and that we care so much about humanity. And I definitely agree. Like that's the way to change it. To show our humanity, not the disability. That autism is actually a community, not a disorder. Is the thing I like to
Mhm.
say because we bring people in so many unique ways. It's like how well do we communicate and navigate the world through iPhones? That came from an autistic mind who saw a need. Facebook came from an autistic mind. And go on the contributions we have. And Lauren, you are definitely leading the way, especially in a millennial way through Instagram, ways that we can just continue showing how beautiful and special we all are and celebrating how different we are. Because differences aren't a bad thing, they're a beautiful thing.
Yes, thank you. And I couldn't agree more.
All right, Lauren, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more tips from you?
I would say just go onto Instagram at AskBNL. That's where I'm most active. I respond to DMs. And if you have any tip requests, please let me know, anybody out there listening, because I love to answer them.
All right, Lauren. Thank you so much for coming on my show, folks. This is Sam Huber signing off of Heroes of Autism. Please subscribe in the link below. I hope you guys are having an amazing Tuesday. Again, Lauren, thank you so much, and we're